The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with conversation as representatives from hundreds of worlds gathered for the weekly session. At the human table, Ambassador Marcus Rivera adjusted his simple blue uniform and reviewed his notes one final time. After 30 years of diplomatic service, he still felt proud when other species looked to Earth's delegation for peaceful solutions to their problems. Another border dispute between the Zentari and the Voxian clans, his aide whispered, sliding a datapad across the polished table. They're asking for human mediation again, Marcus nodded. It was the third request this month. Ever since humanity had joined the Galactic Council 200 years ago, they had become known as the galaxy's peacekeepers. Other species called them the Gentle Giants, a race that had learned the true cost of war and chosen a better path. The history was well known throughout the galaxy. In the 22nd century, Earth had nearly destroyed itself in the resource wars. Cities burned, oceans boiled, and billions died before humanity finally said enough. They had rebuilt their world, sworn off violence, and when they finally reached the stars, they brought peace instead of conquest. High above Earth's surface, Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the TDF Meridian, flagship of the Terran Defense Fleet. Through the massive viewport, she could see the blue marble that was home to 12 billion souls. The fleet around her was small, just 47 ships spread across all of human space to protect Earth and its colonies. "Ma'am, the morning patrol reports are in," Lieutenant James Park said, approaching with a tablet. "All quiet on the border sectors. The usual merchant traffic, a few research vessels, nothing more." Sarah accepted the report with a tired smile. At 68, she was old for a fleet commander, but there wasn't much demand for military leadership in the Terran Federation. Her ships were mostly ceremonial now, symbols of humanity's past rather than tools of war. The real work of protecting human interest happened in council chambers and negotiation rooms. "Any word from New Geneva?" she asked. Ambassador Rivera sent his monthly update. "The colony's population just hit 12 million. They've taken in another 100,000 refugees from the Kelton Civil War." Sarah's chest swelled with quiet pride. New Geneva had been humanity's greatest achievement, a world dedicated entirely to helping others. No military bases, no weapons factories, just hospitals, schools, and homes for those who had nowhere else to go. It was everything humanity aspired to be. Meanwhile, in the outer rim of Kethvar space, Supreme Commander Thakvor studied the holographic display showing human territory. His reptilian eyes gleamed with cold calculation as he traced the shipping routes and colony positions with one clawed finger. "Tell me again why we should fear these humans," he hissed to his intelligence officer. "Supreme Commander, their reputation speaks for itself. They ended the Carillion Wars through negotiation alone. The Theta Sector disputes were resolved without a single shot fired because of human intervention. Their diplomatic influence is their weakness." Thakvor interrupted, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "I have read their history. They fight amongst themselves like animals, nearly destroy their world, then suddenly become pacifists. This is not evolution, this is cowardice dressed up as wisdom." The intelligence officer shifted nervously. "But their technology, Supreme Commander. Their cities, their ships, built for comfort, not war. When did you last see a human military exercise? When did their defense fleet last fire its weapons in anger?" Thakvor's laugh was like grinding stone. "They have grown soft, content to hide behind treaties and talk of peace. The galaxy sees them as wise. I see them as prey." On the agricultural world of New Harvest, Captain Elena Vasquez walked through the golden wheat fields that stretched to the horizon. Her ship, the exploration vessel Harmony's Dawn, was in orbit undergoing routine maintenance. She had volunteered for the assignment partly to escape the endless ceremonies and diplomatic functions that seem to define human space service these days. Her communication device chimed. "Captain, we're getting some unusual readings from the outer sensor network," came her first officer's voice. "What kind of readings?" "Ships, ma'am. Lots of them. But they're staying just outside our detection range like they're watching us." Elena frowned. "Any identification signals?" "Negative. They go dark whenever our sensors try to lock on. It was probably nothing. Space was full of survey ships, merchants, and explorers from hundreds of different species. But something about the timing felt wrong. She made a mental note to report it to Fleet Command when they returned to Earth. Back in the council chambers, Ambassador Rivera was growing frustrated. The Kethvar delegate, a massive reptilian creature named Subcommander Krex, had been making increasingly aggressive statements about weak species hiding behind outdated treaties. The hegemony grows tired of this council's inability to maintain order, Krex announced, his voice booming across the chamber. Perhaps it is time for stronger species to take a more active role in galactic affairs. The council has maintained peace for over a century, Rivera replied calmly. Surely that is worth preserving. Krex's laugh was harsh. Peace or paralysis? When the strong are held back by the weak, is that truly peace or merely the absence of honest conflict? Rivera felt a chill run down his spine. He had heard similar words before, in history books describing the dark times before the Galactic Council. But this was different. This was now, and species like humanity had too much to lose if the old ways returned. I would remind the honored delegate that strength comes in many forms, Rivera said carefully. The ability to choose peace when war is possible is perhaps the greatest strength of all. Or the greatest weakness, Krex replied, his eyes gleaming. Time will tell which interpretation is correct. As the session ended and delegates began filing out, Rivera noticed several species watching the humans with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some seemed sympathetic, others appeared calculating. But there was something else, anticipation, as if they were waiting for something to happen. Admiral Chen received Rivera's report that evening while reviewing fleet deployment schedules. The Kethvar were making noise, but they had been doing that for months. Still, something felt different this time. She pulled up the classified files on human military capabilities, files that hadn't been opened in decades. Computer, show me current fleet readiness status. Terran Defense Fleet currently operates 47 vessels at 60% combat readiness. Estimated time to full combat deployment, 72 hours. Sarah stared at the numbers. 72 hours to mobilize 47 ships against an empire that fielded thousands. If the Kethvar were serious about testing the galactic order, humanity was about to discover just how much their peaceful reputation was actually worth. But there were other files, deeper in the archives, marked with security classifications that few people even remembered existed. Sarah's fingers hovered over the access key, then pulled back. Those files were from another time, another humanity. The galaxy was at peace, and it would stay that way, she hoped. The first warning came at 3:47 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Captain Maria Santos was finishing her night shift at the New Geneva Orbital Monitoring Station when her sensors lit up with contact signatures. Dozens of ships dropping out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. Control, this is Monitoring Station Alpha. I'm reading multiple unidentified vessels entering our space, requesting immediate identification. Static filled the comm channel for several seconds before a harsh alien voice responded. Human vessel, you're ordered to stand down. Evacuate the system immediately or face destruction. Maria's blood ran cold. She recognized the accent, Kethvar. But this was human space protected by galactic treaty. No military force had entered this system in over 100 years. Unknown vessels. This is a civilian system with no military targets. Please state your intentions and identify yourselves according to galactic law. The response came in the form of energy beams that tore through her small station. Maria had just enough time to trigger the emergency beacon before the station exploded around her. On the surface of New Geneva, Dr. Jennifer Walsh was making her morning rounds at the Central Medical Complex when the alert sirens began wailing. She looked up from her patient, a young Zentari refugee recovering from radiation exposure, and saw the staff looking around in confusion. "What's the alert for?" asked Nurse Peterson. Jennifer checked her communicator, but the colony's emergency network was already overloaded. Through the hospital's main window, she could see people in the streets pointing up at the sky. Dark shapes were moving against the stars, ships, lots of them, in attack formation. "This has to be some kind of mistake," she whispered. Supreme Commander Thakavor stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and watched his fleet take positions around the human colony world. 200 ships, the pride of the Kethvar hegemony, arranged in perfect attack formation. "Supreme Commander, we are receiving multiple surrender requests from the surface," his communications officer reported. "Ignore them," Thakvor hissed. "Open fire on all orbital installations first, then begin systematic bombardment of population centers. Start with the largest cities. Sir, these are civilians. They have no military, they are humans. That is enough. Takvor's eyes gleamed with savage satisfaction. Today, the galaxy learns what happens to species that grow weak. Begin the bombardment. The first wave of attacks targeted New Geneva's small orbital platforms, communication relays, weather stations, and cargo handlers. They were destroyed in minutes, cutting the colony off from the outside galaxy. Then the real horror began. Energy beams rained down from orbit like deadly lightning, targeting hospitals, schools, residential areas, and refugee camps. The HFY weapons were designed to cause maximum terror. They burned slowly, giving people time to see death approaching, but not enough time to escape. Dr. Walsh threw herself over her young patient as the medical complex shook under orbital bombardment. Through the cracking windows, she could see pillars of fire rising from the refugee district. 12,000 beings from a dozen different species had been living there, seeking safety after escaping wars in their home systems. "Doctor, we need to evacuate," shouted Peterson, but Jennifer couldn't move. Outside, she could see children running through the streets while energy beams fell like rain around them. On Earth, Admiral Chen was awakened by her aide pounding on her quarters door. "Ma'am, urgent message from New Geneva. They're under attack." Sarah was out of bed and dressed in minutes. In the Fleet Command Center, she found chaos. Officers were trying to establish contact with the colony, while analyzing the fragmentary reports coming through. "What do we know?" she demanded. "HFY fleet, at least 200 ships. They began bombardment 30 minutes ago. All orbital stations have been destroyed and they're targeting civilian areas." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. "Civilian areas? Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. They hit the refugee camps first, then the hospitals and schools. No military targets have been touched because there aren't any." For a moment, Sarah couldn't speak. New Geneva was humanity's greatest achievement, a world of healers and helpers, home to millions of refugees from across the galaxy. It had no weapons, no defenses, nothing but hope and kindness. "Get me Ambassador Rivera immediately," she said finally. Rivera was already on his way to an emergency session of the Galactic Council when Sarah's call reached him. His face was pale as he listened to the reports. "This has to be a mistake," he kept saying. "No civilized species attacks medical facilities. There must be some misunderstanding." But even as he spoke, the evidence kept pouring in. Video feeds from the surface showed HFY ships methodically destroying everything that moved. When groups of civilians tried to surrender, waving white flags and peace symbols, the bombardment only intensified. The council chamber erupted in confused voices when Rivera presented the evidence. Representatives from hundreds of species stared at the footage in shock. Some seemed genuinely horrified, others appeared calculating, and a few looked almost pleased. "The Terran Federation demands immediate intervention," Rivera announced. "This is genocide, pure and simple. The HFY must be stopped." Sub-Commander Krex, the HFY representative, stood calmly. "The hegemony is conducting legitimate military operations against a hostile species. Any casualties are regrettable but unavoidable." "Hostile?" Rivera's voice cracked. "They're doctors and teachers. They're caring for your own species' refugees." "They are humans," Krex replied simply. "Their very existence is a threat to galactic stability." The debate that followed lasted for hours while New Geneva burned. Some species called for sanctions, others suggested diplomatic solutions, and many simply remained silent. By the time the council agreed to form a fact-finding committee, the bombardment had been going on for 2 days. On New Geneva's surface, the survivors huddled in underground shelters and tried to help the wounded. Dr. Walsh had converted a subway tunnel into a makeshift hospital, but her supplies were running out. The lucky ones died quickly. Others suffered from radiation poisoning and burns that would take days to kill them. "How many?" she asked her assistant during a brief break. "Best estimate, 800,000 still alive, scattered across the planet. Maybe fewer. 800,000 out of 12 million. Jennifer closed her eyes and tried not to think about the numbers. Somewhere above them, the HFY ships continued their methodical destruction, hunting down any sign of life with patient efficiency. After 72 hours, the bombardment finally stopped. Supreme Commander Thakvor surveyed his work with satisfaction. The human colony was a smoking ruin, its cities destroyed, its people scattered or dead. Most importantly, word of the attack had spread throughout the galaxy. "Send a message to the Galactic Council," he ordered. The hegemony regrets the necessary action taken against the human colony of New Geneva. We will accept their unconditional surrender at any time. The response from Earth came 12 hours later, delivered by Ambassador Rivera in the council chamber. His voice was steady, but those who knew him could see the rage burning in his eyes. The Terran Federation categorically rejects the hegemony's demands. We will pursue all appropriate diplomatic channels to seek justice for the victims of this unprovoked attack. In the meantime, we are organizing humanitarian aid for the survivors. Krex's laugh echoed through the chamber. Humanitarian aid? The humans speak of aid while their people lie dead. This is the weakness that will destroy them all. What none of them knew was that even as Rivera spoke of diplomacy and aid, other messages were being sent through secure channels. Deep in Earth's government complex, officials who hadn't spoken in decades were being contacted. Ancient protocols were being activated, and in hidden facilities throughout human space, automated systems were receiving authorization codes that hadn't been used in 200 years. The galaxy saw humanity's response as pathetic weakness. They had no idea that the true response hadn't even begun. 3 days after the New Geneva massacre, Admiral Sarah Chen received a message that changed everything. It came through channels she hadn't used in decades with authorization codes she barely remembered. The message was simple. Report to Earth Command, immediately, bring no one. The flight from her flagship to Earth took 6 hours. 6 hours to think about what she had seen in those horrible video feeds from New Geneva. 6 hours to remember why humanity had sworn off war in the first place. And 6 hours to wonder if that oath was about to be broken. Earth Command was buried 3 kilometers beneath the Swiss mountains, in facilities that most people thought were just historical museums. Sarah had been there once before as a young officer studying military history. The corridors looked the same, clean, sterile, and empty. But now there was activity. People she didn't recognize hurried past carrying files marked with classifications she hadn't seen in 20 years. President Elena Kozlov was waiting for her in the deepest level of the complex, in a room that officially didn't exist. She was a small woman with gray hair and tired eyes, but Sarah could see the steel beneath her diplomatic exterior. Admiral, thank you for coming so quickly. Ma'am, I have to ask, what's happening here? These facilities were decommissioned decades ago. President Kozlov touched a control panel, and the wall displays came alive with star charts showing human space. Red markers indicated Kethvar fleet positions. There were a lot more of them than the public knew. Tell me, Admiral, do you believe that Kethvar will stop with New Geneva? Sarah studied the displays. Kethvar ships were moving toward 3 more human colonies. No, ma'am. I think they're just getting started. So do we. Which means humanity faces a choice. We can continue to pursue diplomatic solutions while they murder our people, or... She paused, touching another control. New displays showed technical readouts Sarah didn't recognize. Or we can remember who we used to be. In a research station orbiting Jupiter, Dr. Yuki Tanaka was working on atmospheric processor designs when her life was turned upside down. The message came from Earth Command, a summons she never expected to receive. Her great-grandfather had been Admiral Hiroshi Tanaka, one of humanity's greatest military minds during the Resource Wars. But that was ancient history, wasn't it? Dr. Tanaka, we need you to look at some old files, the Earth Command official explained when she arrived. Files that belong to your family. They led her to an archive that smelled of dust and secrets. The files were stored in physical form, too sensitive for digital networks. As she opened the first folder, she saw her great-grandfather's handwriting. Battle plans, ship designs, tactical analyses from humanity's darkest period. Why are you showing me this? She whispered. Because you're the only one left who might understand them, and because we might need to understand them ourselves. Meanwhile, in diplomatic channels throughout the galaxy, Ambassador Rivera was fighting a losing battle. He presented evidence, made passionate speeches, and called in every favor he had earned over 30 years of service. The response was always the same: concern, committee formations, and calls for patience. The Galactic Council is prepared to consider sanctions against the Kethvar hegemony, announced the Council President, a spider-like being from the Arrakos system. We will form a commission to investigate the incident. Incident? Rivera's voice cracked. 12 million people are dead and you call it an incident? But he could see it in their eyes, not just indifference, but calculation. Some species were already wondering if they could grab human territory for themselves. Others were curious to see how far they could push this famously peaceful race. What they couldn't see was the quiet activity happening throughout human space. Merchant ships were making unusual deliveries to remote outposts. Industrial facilities that had been converted to civilian use were suddenly working 3 shifts. And in the asteroid belts around a dozen systems, mining operations were discovering very strange ore deposits. On the industrial world of New Birmingham, factory supervisor Tom Williams received orders that made no sense. His facility had been building atmospheric processors for 70 years. Now he was being told to retool his entire production line for classified materials. What kind of classified materials? He asked the government inspector. The kind that don't officially exist. Your new work orders are in the sealed files. Tom, I need you to understand something. This project never happened. The people working on it were never here. The materials being produced don't exist. Tom opened the sealed orders and felt his blood turn cold. These weren't atmospheric processors. These were weapon components. Weapons like nothing he had ever seen before. Deep in the archives beneath Geneva, librarian Margaret Foster was having the strangest week of her life. Government officials kept arriving with requests for historical documents, military records, technical specifications, strategic analyses from the resource wars. Files that had been sealed for 2 centuries were being checked out by people with security clearances she didn't know existed. What's all this for? She asked one of the officials. Research project, very historical in nature. But his eyes told a different story. This wasn't about the past. This was about the future. In Kethvar space, Supreme Commander Thakvor was celebrating his victory over the weak humans. Intelligence reports showed that Earth was organizing humanitarian missions and pursuing diplomatic protests. Exactly what he had expected from a race of cowards. Supreme Commander, our scouts report increased merchant traffic in human space, his intelligence officer reported. Mostly routine cargo runs, some industrial supplies. Let me know if they mobilize their defense fleet, Thakvor replied dismissively. Otherwise ignore it. 47 ships could not challenge a single battle group, let alone our full fleet. What he didn't know was that those merchant ships were carrying very special cargo. What his scouts couldn't detect were the facilities that had been quietly reactivating throughout human space, and what his intelligence network couldn't. Penetrate were the secure communications linking Earth to installations that officially didn't exist. Dr. Tanaka found herself leading a team of specialists in a facility that looked like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. Engineers, tacticians, and weapons designers who had been living quiet civilian lives were suddenly working 18-hour days on projects that chilled their souls. Are we really doing this? Asked one of the engineers, a woman who had been designing children's playgrounds just a week before. Are we really going back to that? Yuki looked at the displays showing the massacre at New Geneva. Children running through burning streets while energy beams fell like rain. They made the choice for us, she said quietly. All we're doing is remembering what we learned how to do. The work proceeded in secret. Supply ships moved through space on routes that avoided all major shipping lanes. Personnel transfers happened under cover of industrial training programs. And in shipyards that had been decommissioned for generations, construction lights began burning through the night. Admiral Chen received her new orders on a quantum-encrypted channel that bypassed all normal communications. The message was simple. Prepare for activation of Protocol 7. Await further instructions. Protocol 7. Sarah had learned about it in military academy, back when such things were still taught. It was the plan for reconstituting human military power in the event of existential threat. She had never imagined it would actually be used. Her aide knocked on her door. Ma'am, we're getting some unusual requests from Earth Command. They want complete personnel files on all our most experienced combat officers. Combat officers? We haven't had combat in 200 years. That's just it, ma'am. They specifically want officers whose families had military experience during the resource wars. Apparently, there are more of them than we thought. There were indeed more of them than anyone had thought. Throughout human space, the descendants of warriors were being quietly contacted. Some didn't even know about their family histories. Others had spent their lives trying to forget. But the genetic memory was there, waiting to be awakened. Captain Elena Vasquez was finishing her patrol around New Harvest when she received new orders. Report to coordinates that didn't appear on any official star chart. Bring her ship and crew, Tell no one where they were going and prepare for extended deep space operations. The coordinates led to what looked like an empty patch of space, but as her ship approached, Elena's sensors began picking up energy signatures. Lots of them. Ships were out there hidden by technology she didn't recognize. "Captain, I'm reading multiple vessels," her sensor operator reported, "but they're not on any configuration I know." Elena stared at her displays as the hidden fleet began to reveal itself. Sleek predatory shapes emerged from cloaking fields, ships unlike anything in the current human fleet, ships that looked like they were built for one purpose only: war. "Welcome to the Navy of Vengeance," came a transmission from the largest vessel. "Please prepare to receive new orders." The second Kethavar assault began exactly as Thakvor had planned. 200 ships dropped out of hyperspace around New Harvest, humanity's largest agricultural world. Intelligence reports showed the same pattern as New Geneva. No military defenses, no weapons platforms, just farms and peaceful civilians. "This time, we broadcast the attack live," Thakvor ordered from his flagship. "Let the galaxy see what happens to weak species who refuse to submit." Sub-Commander Vextar looked uncomfortable. "Supreme Commander, perhaps we should offer surrender terms first?" The Galactic Council is full of cowards who speak loudly and do nothing. Begin the bombardment. Target the largest population centers first. On New Harvest's surface, farmers and their families looked up at the sky in terror as dark shapes blotted out the sun. They had heard about New Geneva, but somehow many had believed it couldn't happen again. Not to them. Not in a civilized galaxy. But the Kethavar fleet took their positions with practiced efficiency. Energy weapons powered up, targeting systems locked onto civilian areas, and communication arrays prepared to broadcast humanity's humiliation across the galaxy. Then something impossible happened. Space itself seemed to ripple around the Kethavar fleet. Energy signatures that had been empty space moments before suddenly blazed to life on every sensor screen. Ships materialized from nothing, appearing in perfect battle formations throughout the system. "What is this?" Thakvor hissed, staring at his tactical display in disbelief. Hundreds of contacts were appearing, sleek. Predatory vessels unlike anything in his intelligence files. "Supreme Commander, we're being hailed on all frequencies," his communications officer reported, his voice shaking. "Put it through." The voice that filled the Kethavar fleet command channels was calm, professional, and absolutely terrifying in its certainty. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Navy. You have committed acts of genocide against human civilians. You entered this system with the intention of murdering innocent people. There will be no warning. There will be no quarter. There will be no survivors." Thakvor's laugh was harsh and desperate. "Impossible. Humans have no military. Their defense fleet has 47 ships and they're all accounted for." The response came in the form of weapons fire. The human ships moved like nothing Thakvor had ever seen. They didn't attack in formation like civilized naval forces. They hunted. Individual vessels darted through the Kethavar formation like predators picking off prey, their weapons tearing through shields and armor that had never failed before. "Return fire. All ships, return fire." Thakvor screamed, his fleet tried. Energy beams and missile salvos filled the space between the fleets. But the human ships seemed to know where every shot was going before it was fired. They twisted through the barrage like dancers, never losing speed, never breaking off their attacks. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of her new ship, the destroyer New Geneva's Children, and watched her tactical display with grim satisfaction. 3 weeks of intensive training had awakened something in her crew that she didn't entirely understand. They moved as one mind, anticipated each other's actions, and fought with a precision that seemed impossible. "Target their command ship," she ordered. "Full spread, all tubes." Her weapons officer, a young man whose entire family had died at New Geneva, smiled coldly. "With pleasure, Captain." The Eternal Dominion, pride of the Kethavar fleet, shuddered under multiple impacts. Thakvor was thrown from his command chair as explosions ripped through his ship's hull. "Damage report. Shields down to 30%. Hull breaches on 7 decks. We're losing life support." Around him, his proud fleet was being systematically dismantled. Human ships worked in perfect coordination, each vessel covering the others while pressing home devastating attacks. Kethavar ships that had terrorized a dozen systems were reduced to scrap metal in minutes. "Supreme Commander, we're receiving surrender offers from several of our ships," the communications officer reported. Tell them to keep fighting. The hegemony does not surrender. But even as he spoke, Thakfor could see the truth on his displays. This wasn't a battle. This was an execution. Throughout the galaxy, species that had dismissed humanity as weak watched the Battle of New Harvest with growing horror. The humans hadn't just built a secret military force. They had built something that fought like the stuff of nightmares. Where did they get those ships? Whispered the Zentari ambassador, watching the live feeds in his embassy. More importantly, replied his aide, where did they learn to fight like that? The answer lay in the history books that most species had forgotten. Humans hadn't abandoned warfare because they were weak. They had abandoned it because they were too good at it. The same species that had nearly destroyed their own world in the resource wars had simply been hiding their fangs for 2 centuries. Admiral Chen watched the battle from her flagship, the dreadnought never forgotten. Around her, the Navy of Vengeance moved through the Kethvar fleet like death itself. Every ship in her force was crewed by volunteers who had lost family at New Geneva. Every weapon that fired carried the names of the dead. Every victory was purchased with grief turned into purpose. Admiral, the enemy flagship is trying to flee, reported her tactical officer. Let them run. We'll catch them eventually. Focus on the ships still shooting at civilians because that's what the Kethvar were doing. Even as their military formation collapsed, some ships were continuing to target the planet's surface. Energy beams rained down on farms and cities, killing families who had never hurt anyone. It was a mistake they would regret. The human ships that had been methodically destroying military targets suddenly changed tactics. They began hunting the ships attacking civilians with a fury that shocked even their own crews. No prisoners were taken. No quarter was given. Ships that targeted non-combatants were not just destroyed, they were obliterated so completely that barely atoms remained. My God, whispered Dr. Jennifer Walsh, watching from New Harvest's surface as human ships carved through the sky above her like avenging angels. She had survived New Geneva barely, and been evacuated to help treat wounded on New Harvest. Now she was watching humanity's response to what had been done to her world. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. The battle lasted 4 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, 197 Kethvar ships had been destroyed. 3 had managed to escape by fleeing the system before the human cloaking fields dropped. Not a single human vessel had been lost. In the aftermath, as rescue ships moved to help survivors and damage control teams swept through the wreckage, the galaxy began to understand what had happened. Humanity hadn't just hidden a military force. They had hidden a military tradition that stretched back to their species' darkest hours. This is Captain Elena Vasquez of the Terran destroyer New Geneva's Children. Came the broadcast that would be replayed on news networks across the galaxy. To any Kethvar forces receiving this message, you killed our children. You murdered our healers. You thought we were weak because we chose peace. The camera showed her face, and viewers could see something that chilled them to their souls. This wasn't anger. This wasn't rage. This was the cold, patient calculation of a species that had learned how to wage war on a scale that most civilizations couldn't comprehend. You were wrong. We remember how to fight. We remember how to kill. And we remember who taught us. She paused, looking directly into the camera. We learned from the best teachers in the galaxy, ourselves, during our resource wars. Every tactical manual you've ever read, every strategy you think you understand, every concept of military power you believe in, we wrote them. In our own blood, on our own world. The transmission ended, but its impact echoed across the galaxy. In council chambers and military headquarters, species that had dismissed humanity as harmless were suddenly very, very afraid. On Earth, President Kozlov stood in the depths of the command bunker and watched the tactical displays showing human fleets moving throughout space. The Navy of Vengeance was real now, no longer a secret project but an active military force. Ma'am, we're receiving communication requests from 17 different species, her aide reported. They want to confirm that their treaties with humanity are still in effect. Tell them yes, assuming they haven't committed genocide against human civilians recently. She turned to Admiral Chen's image on the communication screen. Sarah, what's your assessment? The Kethvar will regroup and try again. They have to, or they'll look weak to every other aggressive species in the galaxy. But next time they'll bring everything they have. And we'll be ready? Admiral Chen's smile was cold as winter. Oh, we'll be ready. The Navy of Vengeance has been patient for 200 years. We're just getting started. The hunt began immediately after the Battle of New Harvest. Admiral Sarah Chen divided the Navy of Vengeance into smaller task forces, each designed for one purpose: finding and destroying every HFY military installation in the galaxy. We're not fighting a war, she explained to her fleet commanders during their first strategic briefing. Wars are fought between armies. This is pest control. The first target was a HFY supply depot in the Outer Rim, protected by 30 warships and considered impregnable. The human task force arrived without warning, materialized from cloaking fields, and eliminated all 30 ships in 18 minutes. The depot was reduced to scrap metal shortly afterward. What shocked the galaxy wasn't just the speed of the victory, but what happened next. The human ships rescued every civilian worker from the station before destroying it. HFY military personnel were given exactly one chance to surrender. Those who took it were treated according to galactic law. Those who didn't were killed without hesitation. This is impossible, raged Fleet Commander Zekthau, studying the reports in his fortress on the HFY border world of Qatar Prime. How do they move so fast? How do they know where our bases are? His intelligence officer looked uncomfortable. Sir, they seem to have complete information on our military structure. Locations, strengths, even our classified communication codes. Spies? Impossible. No human has ever set foot in HFY space. Perhaps not, sir. But human intelligence networks have been operating throughout the galaxy for 2 centuries. They've been watching everyone, it was true. While other species had seen humanity's diplomatic corps as weak peacekeepers, they had actually been building the most sophisticated intelligence network in galactic history. Every trade agreement, every cultural exchange, every refugee assistance program had been gathering information. Not for conquest, but for protection. Now that information was being used for something else entirely. The second target was a major HFY shipyard, protected by 2 full battle groups. The humans arrived during a shift change, when the defensive fleet was spread out and vulnerable. 43 HFY ships were destroyed before they could form a proper battle line. The shipyard itself was methodically dismantled, with every military vessel under construction reduced to component atoms. Again, civilian workers were evacuated first. Again, surrendering personnel were treated properly. And again, those who continued fighting were eliminated with ruthless efficiency. They're not just destroying our forces, reported Subcommander Vextar, one of the few officers to survive the New Harvest battle. They're hunting us, like we're animals. Supreme Commander Thakvor, recovering from his injuries in his fortress on the HFY homeworld, studied the tactical reports with growing desperation. In 3 weeks, humanity had destroyed 60% of his military infrastructure. Not damaged, destroyed completely. How many ships do they have? He demanded. Intelligence estimates range from 1,000 to 3,000 vessels. But sir, that's impossible. No species can build that many ships in secret. Clearly they can. The question is how long they've been doing it. The answer was 200 years. While the galaxy had believed humanity was weak and peaceful, they had been quietly preparing for exactly this scenario. Every human colony had hidden shipyards. Every mining operation had doubled as weapons production. Every peaceful research station had been developing military technology. The galaxy had mistaken patience for weakness. They were learning the difference. Ambassador Rivera watched the military campaign from his office in the Galactic Council building, feeling betrayed and confused. For 30 years he had believed in humanity's commitment to peace. Now he discovered that his own government had been planning for war the entire time. "You lied to me," he said when President Kozlov called to brief him. "No, Marcus. We hoped you would never need to know the truth. You genuinely believed in peace, and that made you the perfect ambassador. But we learned something during the resource wars. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. And the worst was always this? Always war? The worst was always genocide. Like what happened to New Geneva." Kozlov's voice was tired. "Marcus, do you know why we really stopped fighting each other during the resource wars? Because we realized war was wrong. No. We stopped because we realized we were too good at it. We were killing each other so efficiently that our species faced extinction. So we made a choice. Turn that talent outward for protection or lose it forever." Rivera stared at his diplomatic credentials on his desk. "What am I supposed to tell the council?" "Tell them the truth." Tell them that humanity tried diplomacy first. Tell them that we begged for justice through proper channels. Tell them that we only returned to what we are when they forced us to. The third phase of the campaign targeted HFY patrol fleets. Human task forces appeared throughout their territory, striking convoy routes and border patrols. HFY ships began traveling in larger groups for protection, but it didn't matter. The humans seemed to know where every ship was going before it got there. Captain Elena Vasquez stood on the bridge of New Geneva's Children and watched another HFY convoy die under her guns. Her crew worked with mechanical precision, following targeting patterns that seemed to come from some deep genetic memory. "Captain, we've eliminated all military vessels," her weapons officer reported. 3 cargo ships remain. They're carrying medical supplies to HFY civilian colonies. Let them go. Our fight is with soldiers, not healers. It was that restraint that began to turn galactic opinion. Other species watched as humanity demonstrated the difference between military efficiency and mindless slaughter. HFY military forces were destroyed without mercy, but civilians were protected with the same determination. The Zentari ambassador spoke for many when he addressed the Galactic Council. "We are witnessing something unprecedented. A species that can wage total war while maintaining moral boundaries. The humans are not conquering the HFY. They are surgically removing their ability to harm others." But Thakavor refused to surrender. Pride and desperation drove him to one final gamble. He gathered every remaining ship in his fleet, nearly 800 vessels, and prepared to attack Earth itself. "If we cannot defeat them in detail, we will strike at their heart," he declared. Earth's destruction will end this war. The HFY armada jumped to hyperspace, confident that humanity's forces were scattered across the galaxy hunting individual targets. They expected to find Earth defended by the old Terran defense fleet, 47 obsolete ships commanded by ceremonial officers. They found something else entirely. The Navy of Vengeance was waiting for them. All 2,000 ships arranged in defensive formations around Earth that had been planned for 2 centuries. Admiral Chen's voice reached them before they could even consider retreat. "Supreme Commander Thakavor, you are guilty of genocide against human civilians. Your species committed the ultimate crime, and now you face the ultimate response. This is your last chance to surrender." Thakvor's reply was predictable. The HFY hegemony bows to no inferior species. "All ships attack the human homeworld." The Battle of Earth lasted 6 hours and became the stuff of legend. 800 HFY ships against 2,000 human vessels, with the survival of both species hanging in the balance. But it was never really a contest. The humans didn't just fight better, they fought smarter. They used tactics that no military academy taught, strategies that came from the darkest chapters of their own history. They turned the HFY fleet's aggression against itself, channeling attacks into killing zones and using the enemy's own momentum to destroy them. Dr. Jennifer Walsh watched the battle from Earth's surface, along with 12 billion other humans. The sky burned with weapons fire as 2 species decided each other's fate among the stars. She thought about New Geneva, about the children she couldn't save, about the patients who died in her arms. Justice, she realized, sometimes came with fangs and claws. When the battle ended, 17 HFY ships remained out of 800. They were allowed to return home with a message from Admiral Chen. "The HFY hegemony is hereby disbanded. Your military is destroyed. Your homeworld is under blockade. You will surrender unconditionally and submit to galactic justice, or we will complete what you started at New Geneva." The surrender came within hours. Thakavor and his surviving commanders were turned over to an international tribunal. The HFY people, freed from their militant leadership, began the long process of rebuilding their civilization. In the aftermath, Ambassador Rivera stood before the Galactic Council one final time. His resignation letter was already prepared. "Honored delegates, I spent 30 years believing that diplomacy could solve any problem. I was wrong. Some problems can only be solved with force. The tragedy is not that force was necessary. The tragedy is that it was ignored until genocide became the alternative." He paused, looking around the chamber at species who had watched New Geneva burn and done nothing. "Humanity returns to its policy of peace, but we will never again mistake patience for weakness or diplomacy for surrender. We tried to show the galaxy a better way. When that failed, we showed you what happens when you murder our children." President Kozlov's final address to humanity was broadcast from the same bunker where the Navy of Vengeance had been born. My fellow humans, we have learned something terrible about ourselves. We are still very, very good at war. We hope never to use that knowledge again. When we were forced to, we did so with precision, restraint, and purpose. She paused, looking tired but resolved. The Navy of Vengeance will not be disbanded. It will remain as a reminder to any species that considers genocide an acceptable policy. We are still the gentle giants of the galaxy, but we are giants, and giants can step on those who threaten the innocent. The galaxy learned to live with this new reality. Humanity returned to its role as peacekeeper and mediator, but now their words carried different weight. When human diplomats spoke of consequences, other species listened carefully, and in the depths of space, the ships of the Navy of Vengeance patrolled the darkness, carrying names like New Geneva's children. Never forgotten in price of peace, they were humanity's promise to its enemies and its gift to the innocent, that some lines could never be crossed without facing the species that had learned the hardest lesson of all. That peace is not the absence of the capacity for violence. Peace is the choice not to use it. Until that choice is taken away,